You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 15th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. On today's programme, Donald Trump's Middle East visit excluded one key player in Israel, which is pressing forward with its offensive in Gaza. Then to Hong Kong, which is once again facing a tightening of China's national security law. And after that, to news from right here in the UK, Monocle's foreign editor Alexis Self, you'll be joining us to talk about the Daily Telegraph.
Hi Chris, yes, a new UK law that might allow foreign states to take part ownership in the country's newspapers.
Thank you, Lex. We'll also check in on a new exhibition by British artists Gilbert and George. And finally, it is Thursday. Given what's happening this weekend, I think you can guess what Fernando Augusto Pacheco is bringing us.
Hello, Chris. Today, I'll be telling you the 5 songs you need to know in this year's Eurovision Song Contest.
Just don't let it be Sweden. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. One of the many unusual things about Donald Trump's first foreign trip of his second term is where he has not gone. A multi-day tour of the Middle East that has not included Israel. Bibi Netanyahu may see that as a slight, but that hasn't stopped the Israeli government from pressing ahead with its offensive in Gaza, which has been the central conflict of the Middle East over the past year and a half since Hamas's October 7th attack. Trump himself appears to be supporting this from afar, once again pushing for U.S. control of the enclave to create what he called a freedom zone. Joining me now is Monocle's Middle East correspondent Leila Molana Allen. Leila, great to have you back on the show. We know of an Israeli strike that killed 60 people yesterday. What can you tell us about the last 24 hours?
We do. Well, the death count's now up to over 70. There were major attacks on Gaza's second largest city, Khan Yunis, last night. There was also warnings issued about attacks on Gaza City yesterday, and the IDF put out a map saying where they were going to attack, and most of those targets were schools and hospitals and universities. Now, if we just remember that it was only last year that the IDF was saying, they never attack hospitals, they never attack schools, that this has now become almost a daily occurrence. 2 days ago, the European hospital was attacked, killing several dozen people, and the IDF said that they had identified a Hamas control and command center underneath the hospital. An investigation's been done, and there does not seem to have been any center at all. So what's been happening recently is that quite a few explanations by the IDF of attacks in Gaza have been proven to be false. And there is a sort of feeling that, on the one hand, the IDF is feeling that they have license to do whatever they like. And on the other, there is growing concern in the international community that this is now a war that is not being fought according to any of the typical rules. And we are seeing dozens of Palestinians in Gaza being killed every day as this rolls on, while, of course, we're also seeing a 10-week now humanitarian aid block, which means nothing has entered the Strip for 2.5 months. People are on the brink of starvation, and already several dozen children have died of starvation.
Leila, as you say, there has been international condemnation of this, but it hasn't helped particularly. Might there be any change within Israel that could help with this? We've heard from a former Israeli Prime Minister in Ehud Olmert, for example, speaking out.
So we are certainly seeing some changes inside Israel. We've been seeing protests against the war in Gaza a lot over at least the last year, but much of that has been driven by a concern that this is not the best way to get the remaining 59 hostages, half of whom are sadly dead, out of Gaza. What seems to be changing now is there are new protests, fresh protests, which are being driven by Israelis saying "not in our name," holding pictures of dying and dead children in Gaza, saying we do not want this war in our name anymore. We don't know what this is for. That is quite a change. There's also this issue that, as I say, there are still great concerns that the most likely thing of this continued bombardment campaign and renewed offensive in Gaza, the most likely outcome is that more hostages will be killed as a result. So those hostage families still very angry with Bibi Netanyahu's government. So there is pressure growing inside Israel. The other thing that's changing is Israel's allies. We've already seen France, Emmanuel Macron coming out a few weeks ago saying that he thinks the best step forward now is to recognize Palestinian statehood, to try and move forward with a negotiation of two equal states where they can try and figure out a peace deal, which was, of course, largely damned by the Israeli government, who said this was a reward for terrorism. We've also now seen in the last few days Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's Middle East envoy, who's been leading those negotiations, at least from the Israeli side, changing his tack. What he was saying a few weeks ago was he was trying to negotiate an extension of the first phase of the ceasefire. So another 45 days in which 10 living hostages and the remains of some dead hostages would be handed over in return for negotiations. Hamas saying absolutely not. We will not do anything except the original second stage of the ceasefire, which was a complete end to the hostilities inside Gaza in return for the hostages. In the last couple of days, Steve Witkoff has changed his tune, and he's now saying that Netanyahu is being too resistant. There have been negotiations happening in Qatar, and he is pressuring Israel to become a little bit more lenient, to be more willing to move forward with a different kind of ceasefire arrangement. The problem is there is a strict impasse here, which is that Israel is saying they are going to extend, they're going to launch a new phase even of this offensive into Gaza. They want to, they're saying not occupy, but hold territory. But of course, to everyone, that sounds like an occupation again. And they are going to carry on with security coordination inside Gaza. Meanwhile, Hamas saying the only way that they will end the war is a complete withdrawal of troops, while Israel wants Hamas to completely disarm. So it doesn't seem that these ceasefire negotiations are going anywhere at the moment.
Leila, you mentioned or you touched on there some of the US frustrations with Israel, but at the same time, Donald Trump is, of course, in the Middle East. He's meeting with Arab leaders who would like to mediate a ceasefire in Gaza. Would it have helped if he had actually gone to Israel? Would there have been a stronger push, perhaps, and more pressure on Netanyahu if Trump was actually there?
Well, it's interesting. It depends what you mean by would it help. What seems to have been happening, it certainly would have looked good for Netanyahu if Trump had gone to Israel. What's been very clear with this tour, the Trump administration has said from the start, this is not about Israel and Gaza. This is about business deals. This is about focusing on the Gulf and future business deals for the US, which is exactly what he's negotiated. Quite incredible sums of money, $200 billion worth of deals negotiated in Qatar, $600 billion worth of deals in Saudi Arabia, including one of the largest arms sales deals ever. He's now going to the Emirates today, where I'm sure we'll see some technology deals coming out. But it has, he said from the start, I'm not interested in Israel Gaza right now, but it does actually seem to have pushed the question. And what's happening is Trump seems to be listening to his Middle Eastern allies, other than Netanyahu, which is not looking great for Israel. He's clearly listening to Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Of course, we saw this huge news on Tuesday, him saying that he was going to lift sanctions on Syria, give Syria a chance to succeed, which is what people have been pushing for a long time. And then yesterday he met with Ahmed al-Shara, former jihadi, now the leader of Syria, shook his hand, sat with him for half an hour, interestingly, he said he's a tough guy with a strong past, which is a very interesting Trump glossing over of his involvement with jihadi-linked groups in the past. But so he's clearly got an open ear both to President Erdogan in Turkey, who says he's very close to, and to leaders in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. That does seem also to be influencing his stance on Gaza. You know, he's, as I say, his envoy now saying that they want to push harder on the Israelis. So I actually think that him not going to Israel is a sign to Netanyahu that he is getting frustrated. He's not willing to give them any more rope. And they do actually need to start to bend a little bit on this. That could be what we see from this kind of strong show of solidarity with Arab leaders that we're seeing this week from Trump.
Leila Molana Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky have all said they will not attend proposed ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine in Turkey today. Moscow has instead sent a low-level delegation to Istanbul, though doubt remains about whether or not the talks will now happen at all. Anthony Albanese has held talks with Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto in Jakarta during his first overseas trip since re-election. The pair discussed defence cooperation and global trade, as the Australian Prime Minister described Indonesia as an indispensable partner. And Swiss Federal Railways is piloting weekend night train services connecting major cities like Zurich, Geneva and Basel as part of its Vision 2027 to offer sustainable alternatives to car travel. The test phase takes 8 weekends and targets night owls and early airport travellers. A decision on the programme's future will follow the second test phase in autumn 2025. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Hong Kong has enacted new security laws with penalties of up to 7 years in prison for disclosing Beijing's security operations. 6 mainland security office locations are now prohibited places, and there will be a legislative subcommittee formed to oversee the changes, which of course come based on the national security law that was passed a number of years ago for Hong Kong. And I'm joined now by Michael Moe, who is a former Hong Kong district councillor, now a postgraduate researcher at Newcastle University. Michael, thanks very much for coming on the show. Perhaps you could start by telling us how these changes compare to the national security law as it was originally created.
Thanks for having me, Chris. So these two subsidiary legislations is actually enacted by the negative vetting procedure in the Article 23 legislation, the Hong Kong Domestic National Security legislation, which is passed by the Patriots-only legislature back in last year. So these two subsidiary legislations is actually a response to the Chow Hang Tong's case for at the Court of Final Appeal for not reviewing or submitting the necessary documents that is required by the Hong Kong National Security Police. So in other words, it is the subsidiary legislation is a reaction of the Hong Kong authorities to provide the interrogation power unchecked by the Hong Kong authorities to the Office of Safeguarding National Security, was situated in Hong Kong, but is actually managed by Beijing.
And when you talk about what is managed here by Beijing, there is this thing specifically about prohibited places that are being designated now. What does that mean?
So these designated places draws a parallel or a reference to the existing legislation in Hong Kong regarding to the People's Liberation Army, so the army of the Communist Party sites in Hong Kong. Specifically, if anyone's going to maybe pretty much taking pictures or stepping inside there for protests, they will be pretty much considered as a crime. So previously, these laws, prohibiting average people or protesters could go into the Chinese military sites in Hong Kong, would be prosecuted by the domestic law itself. So it's pretty much like using the common law charges of prosecution, the process. But for now, with the new legislations, for any protesters or anyone who is like mistakenly going into these Office of National Security sites, the designated sites, will be prosecuted on crimes that is on par with pretty much intruding to the CCP's military sites in Hong Kong.
And Michael, when you describe all of this, I mean, frankly, protests in Hong Kong had already been very subdued as a result of the initial national security law. What is the reaction, if we even know, been like to this new update to it? How are citizens responding? How is the business community responding?
The average Hong Konger is pretty much silenced about these legislations for a very simple reason. For any remarks on these kind of national security legislation can be considered as a sedition in Hong Kong, which could land you in jail for maximum 2 years. So definitely the whole city is silenced. I think the business community is also worried about the investigation power that the OSNS has it for now, which pretty much can summon any company directors or whatever members of a business organization within those designated sites for interrogation, which noting that any methods of interrogation is unchecked by the Hong Kong authorities. So there's no guarantees of your safety if you're being summoned to that.
Michael Moe, postgraduate researcher at Newcastle University and a former Hong Kong district councillor. Thank you for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermack. Here in the UK, the government has relaxed rules on foreign ownership of media companies in a bid to allow an Abu Dhabi-funded enterprise to take a stake in the Daily Telegraph. The stake had been blocked by the former Conservative government, but Keir Starmer's Labour is now saying that a little bit of foreign ownership is a good thing if it can keep media companies afloat. Well, joining me now is Monocle's foreign editor, Alexis Self. Lex, good to have you right here in the studio. Give us the history of this Daily Telegraph discussion of ownership, first of all.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the fate of the Daily Telegraph, which is considered one of the UK's two newspapers of record, given its history, has become a kind of bellwether for the state of the UK's traditional print media. The paper's been kind of languishing in this sort of limbo since it was bought a couple of years ago by Redbird IMI, which is an investment firm partly owned by the UAE's government. Now, Redbird took the paper on because its previous owners, who are the billionaire Barclay brothers, media moguls, were offloading it to cover debts. And as soon as Redbird took ownership, it became this kind of cause célèbre because of the fact that it's partly owned by the UAE's government, which is a country that is kind of doesn't have a democratic tradition, no freedom of press, and the fact that the Telegraph is seen as a kind of mouthpiece of the Conservative Party, and obviously the Conservative Party was in government at that time, and there was a huge furore about this, and a law was rushed through Parliament that banned any companies or firms that were owned by foreign governments from having more than 0.1% stake in a UK media title. Since then, the Telegraph has had a few potential buyers, the most serious of which was the publisher of the New York Sun, David Effoun, but no one's been able to get enough UK money together to comply with this new law.
So tell us how this law is now going to change under a Labour government. It's going to allow, I understand, stakes of only 15%, which is not a huge amount, I suppose. Is it still pretty controversial?
Well, it's not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things, but considering it's 0.1% now, it's a big increase. How controversial it is kind of depends on which title is being bought and by whom. I think that the Conservative Party in particular sees itself as a kind of representative of Britain's almost libertarian kind of old democratic tradition in which freedom of speech is kind of sacrosanct. And that's why I think particularly that the Conservative Party objected to the Telegraph being bought by Redbird IMI. At the moment, it seems that worldwide, right-wing papers seem to be more attractive acquisitions, certainly by people who have the kind of money to kind of prop them up.
They also tend to have bigger readerships.
And they tend to have bigger readerships. That's I'm sure, is a big part of it as well. So, yeah, whether it or not it's controversial, I think kind of depends on who's buying which particular paper. And I guess, you kind of take these things on a case-by-case basis. But
you do take these things on a case-by-case basis, which does beg the question then, is this, clearly this is about the Daily Telegraph, but this law does open the door to others as well. in that sense? Is it just about the Daily Telegraph, or could we now see other foreign states potentially looking at investment in other UK papers?
Well, I think the government hopes so, and this law is being debated today, but given the Labour Party's huge majority, it's anticipated to pass Parliament relatively easily. I think the truth is that, as was the case with the Telegraph, these legacy media titles aren't seen necessarily as great investments from a financial perspective. Most of them are loss leaders or thereabouts, although the Telegraph has been quite canny about going online and searching for more digital hits. But they are from a political perspective. And I suppose that was the controversy with Redbird IMI. It was that the government of the UAE perhaps wasn't investing or buying the title because it wanted to make money out of it. It was investing it to give it a kind of mouthpiece and kind of political clout in the UK. I think that the government wants less of that kind of money coming in and more from sovereign wealth funds or from pension funds, which often have a foreign-owned component or government-owned component, perhaps from a country that, like Australia or, South Korea, that has more democracy, more freedom of press. But these pension funds wield a great amount of financial clout, and they are, in a kind of stormy climate, they are more willing, I think, to invest in long-term investments. So I think the government is trying to attract more of that kind of money.
Just to follow up quickly on that, though, that's exactly what a law like this presumably cannot control. Or would there be something in this law that kind of dictates what type of government-owned sovereign wealth fund or other would be the ones that could actually take a stake? Because how can the government control whether it is South Korea, Australia, or the UAE?
Well, I think this government, particularly in the UK, and I think in a lot of Western Europe, are kind of caught in this bind between trying to appear attractive to foreign investment. And when the Labour government came in here last year, it said that growth was its number one target. And in order to achieve that growth, it courted the sovereign wealth funds of countries that aren't necessarily democratic, like Saudi Arabia. And the UK in particular doesn't want to see itself as somewhere that is wrapping up laws in red tape and ring fencing particular industries from foreign investment. So I think the law is designed to open things up and make the UK look like a more attractive place. But as I said earlier, I think it depends on who's buying. If the Chinese government came in and was trying to buy the Times or whatever, I think that would they'd probably find a way to prevent that from happening.
They might find a way. Alexa Self, Monocle's foreign editor, thank you very much for joining us on The Briefing. British artists Gilbert and George open their exhibition Death, Hope, Life, Fear tomorrow at the Gilbert and George Centre in London. Spanning the years 1984 to 1998, the 18 pieces of work centre around the moral dimension of modern society. Monocle Radio's Tom Webb sat down with the artists ahead of the opening. He began by asking what the response has been like to the reopening of the Gilbert and George Centre for the first time in 2 years.
We're very surprised and pleased with the response. We get letters, strangely, from all over the world, from people who've just come to London and seen our centre. The whole idea of the centre was a response to, we were stopped by people in the streets all over the world who said, "I love your art." And we used to say, "Which art?" Well, they hadn't seen an exhibition. They'd seen a magazine article, a television programme, but they'd never been in front of a picture. And so the centre is a place which is always somewhere in London where you can see a real picture.
Yes, every artist wants to be seen. That's quite important. That's why we were not seen enough. So we realized we have to do it ourselves. All the museums, they show you once in a life, once every 2-3 years. But then because after all, we produce, 1,000, 2,000 artworks, and you cannot see them anywhere. So why don't create your own studio?
And is that the type of people you've had coming through your doors, international visitors who love your art?
I say in general, our art attracts a much wider range of people than maybe the more restricted fine art.
I think our art is quite visually powerful, and so they are speaking language that we created. We can show it anywhere. We can go to Japan, they all understand it. South America, we did it all over Europe and every city, and now we are trying to persuade the locals to love our art.
And how important to you is it to keep this place free to enter, and how are you able to keep it free to the public?
It's not so expensive after all, not once it is finished, and it seems we can sell prints to support it.
Prints and ink washes.
Ink wash to support it. It's very easy.
We did a series of ink washes recently with different slogans, no image, just slogans. And which one was the bestseller? Fuck 'em all. Why is that? It's got a good piece of market research on the state of the human race.
You're surrounded by work from the 80s and 90s in which you appear naked for the first time. How did that happen? What was the transition there?
After all, it's just a different suit, not it?
I would say so. Looking at it,
just extended our visual vocabulary, you could say, in academic terms.
The artist had to be visible in total how it is. I really believe that.
Our art has always had a degree of vulnerability, and I think that extended it to a greater degree.
And can you explain the colours as well? Because the reds, yellows, greens, so vibrant, so vivid. What was the choice there?
When we were baby artists, we started to do what we call photo pieces, and they were all black and white because photo paper is black and white. And then one day we spilt a bottle of red ink in the studio, and we thought we'd just push the red all over, and that was discovering red. And then we went on from that to discover all the colours.
Discovered yellow, green, and blue, and after that we discovered everything. And we were able to create we were able to create it for ourselves, this new way of making art.
We're sitting in the middle of the exhibition, and it's hope, life, death, fear. These four concepts, what's your relationship with them?
It was in some funny way. It was David O'Billiard who was the genius who getting all the models for us. He went day and night to all the clubs to find this model for us, and he died of AIDS. So that's Hope, Life, Fear became very visible for us.
It is, apart from everything else, it's just a little bit of a homage to the late David O'Billiard.
You like people to see their own light in their life when they look at your work. What is the light that you see in your work and in life?
I think it is an expression of life, of living, and how wonderful that it is to be alive and have friends and get drunk sometimes.
We want to add to the elaboration of life. Life is more elaborate now than it was when we were babies in the 40s. The world has never been a bigger success story, and we like in our small way to contribute to that. These pictures are contributing to that.
Final question, I guess your relationship with the press, how is it?
I think we always had quite a good press. Sometimes, what you call, even the ones I remember in the Evening Standard, the one who... But it turned out fine, George.
We know one very, very story. At a time when we were having a very, very bad press, and it was 1 week when we had a terrible thing in a national newspaper, a terrible thing in the Evening Standard, and we were stopped on the street by a young person who'd obviously just read his Evening Standard, and he came up. He didn't introduce him, and he said, "They don't look, do they?" We thought that was very, very simple and very revealing. Yeah. They don't look, do they?
But in January,
he got it right.
In January, had a great press. I really believe that. We managed to, seduce them in some way or another.
We also know how little it means. Some days we think it's very important, some days not. But I remember when we had one of the worst newspaper articles ever, and we left the house in fear, thinking all the people in London have just read this horrible news about us. And we passed our neighbour who waved and said, "Good morning, marvellous coverage, marvellous coverage."
Tom Webb there with Gilbert and George. Death, Hope, Life, Fear will remain on view until February 2026. Plenty of time for you to check it out. It'll complement Gilbert and George's 21st Century Pictures at London's Hayward Gallery, which opens October 2025. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, it is the Thursday before the Eurovision Song Contest Grand Finale. And with that, our senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, transforms himself into our Eurovision correspondent. And Fernando, you've brought us a special global countdown, haven't you?
Special, and I'm keeping it very simple as well, Chris. So basically, it's going to be 5 songs you need to know for Eurovision. Let's say you haven't been paying attention to the headlines or haven't been listening enough to Monocle Radio, and you just want to say, which 5 songs can I cheer on the big day on Saturday? I'll give you a little guide here.
You're giving us sort of a little taster. I have to say, Faye, I always say this for Eurovision, that I don't like to listen to all the songs fully beforehand because I want to get the full experience on Saturday. But this is like a little primer.
If it wasn't my job, I would agree with you 100%. I like the kind of level of excitement, but I do have to listen to the tracks. It's my job.
You know what's down, what's going on. And so where are we going to start? What is the 5th track that you recommend?
Well, we're going to Spain, and Spain's an interesting one. Last time they won was 1969, and I genuinely think that the Spaniards, they have been working very hard with very good entries.
They try, but they don't point very well. They always try very hard.
They always try very hard. I remember Chanel with her amazing kind of dance moves. Talking about dance moves, I think they're back this year. And this time it's Melody. And the song is brilliant. I mean, the song's called Essa Diva, This Diva. I mean, can you be more Eurovision than that? Let's have a listen. It makes us all smile, let's be honest.
It does. That is very, very Eurovision. Absolutely.
And can you believe that her career, she's like 20 years of career. I think she started when she was only 10.
Whew,
as an actress, as a dancer, as a singer there, of course. So I do like Melody.
And this is her Eurovision debut.
Absolutely. A little bit cheesy here and there. I like it.
Well, I mean, what is Eurovision if it's not cheesy?
Exactly.
That's what Eurovision is about. You have to have a little bit of cheese. Speaking of which, though, our next entrant is less cheesy, a little more fun, controversial.
Love it.
One of your favorites, though.
It's very, if I may say, empowered, you know. It's definitely my personal favorite. It is from Finland, Erika Wikman with Ich komme. It's funny because there are a lot of restrictions on Eurovision. What words can you say, what words you can't. She managed to escape this kind of restrictions somehow. Maybe because she's singing...
Well, because it can mean so many things. It can be totally innocent. She's just, I'm coming. That's all it means in German. I mean, what else could it possibly mean, Fernando? She's coming onto the stage.
I think she means very well. Erika Wikman, Ich komme. It's the only song that gives me, from this year's selection, that gives me goosebumps.
Goosebumps for that sort of crescendo when she reaches the Ich komme point.
I love the way you say the word crescendo, Chris. And you know what? And do you know the song Underworld, Born Sleepy from 1996, soundtrack of Transporting, British electronic music?
Yes, yeah, I can see some similarities there.
I see a little bit of that. So, it's not cheesy, in my opinion. I think it's a really well-constructed piece of a Finnish electropop.
Finnish electro pop. Well, where are we moving from? I mean, where can we move from there? We just need to climb down now from our Ich komme moment.
Very different vibes. We're heading to France, which is another country that have been trying very hard to win Eurovision. And you know what?
Also some fantastic tracks over the last few years that just didn't quite get the recognition maybe they deserved.
pure artistry, and she was my favorite artist that I've interviewed this year. She was so genuine, so nice, and she's a massive name in France. Usually, not necessarily a country pick the most famous artists, but in the case of Luan, I mean, she has millions and millions of followers. She's one of the best-selling artists in the country, and this song is dedicated to her late mother, because her late mother was a massive Eurovision fan and said, you know what, I want to see you one day on that stage. And this song is basically her saying, I'm here.
I made it.
It's Luan with Mama.
Si j'ai voulu arrêter le temps, maintenant c'est moi qu'elle appelle maman. Maman, maman, maman. J'ai trouvé l'amour indélébile. Tu sais le vrai.
Powerful.
I mean, I gotta say, Fernando, it's very powerful, but it feels like it has that style that France always does. Very strong, very powerful ballad, very moving, but doesn't quite reach the top.
I wonder with a name like Luan, perhaps things could change.
Perhaps.
And I discovered one very fun thing about Luan. Her grandmother was Brazilian, so she does have some Brazilian heritage. Very happy to hear that.
You have a horse in the race.
Exactly.
Okay, well now I'm sort of excited. We're heading to my home country, one of my home countries anyway, Austria. What do you make of this?
And so you should, Chris. Of course, Austria is a great country when it comes to Eurovision. And this is generally the second favorite to win. So there are strong chances, and I can see why. It is operatic, but it is pop and it is techno, all at the same time. His name is JJ. He's Austrian indeed. I think his family is very international, so they lived abroad, but then they moved back to Austria in 2016. I think it's a great song, but I would like to hear a personal take after we listen to this. JJ, Wasted Love.
I'm drowning in my feelings. How do you not see that? Now that you're gone, it's worse than love. It's worse than love. Now that you're gone.
Wow. People love these operatic tones on Eurovision, I have to say.
But how often do the operatic tones win? This is again my question here. It is another very powerful song, very strong voice. It's one of those you feel like will do very well with the jury. But I do wonder about the popular vote.
Well, you've missed there that there was a techno bit. to
Yes,
it.
I need
I
to
think
hear
we
the
skip
techno bit.
hear the techno beat, because when techno and opera gets together, I can see a potential Eurovision winner there. And I would love to go to Austria again. Maybe not to Vienna, because Vienna hosted in 2015, but I don't know.
Somewhere else, Salzburg, my father's hometown,
Salzburg,
somewhere like
Bad
that would
Ischl,
be
Bad Ischl
fabulous.
maybe?
Bad Ischl, there are many options. Austria has really given it a big go ever since that 2015 Conchita Wurst. Like they've been trying very hard, so we'll see how this does. And I have to say, now we're coming to number one, and if this wins, it would be a bit sad because it's kind of predictable. But who do we have at number one?
It is predictable and, not necessarily my favorite song of the bunch, but I have to say I've been singing along to that track. There's something quite catchy about it, and it is in Swedish, so it's interesting that I've been singing along to this. I will explain a bit, because it's quite a funny story, because they are actually Swedish-speaking, but they are from Finland, so they're part of the Swedish-speaking minority in the country. So in a way, it's also a Finnish act, if you think about it. This could be very political, Chris, but this is Kai with Bara Badu Bastu, which is a song about saunas. I mean, it's impossible not to sing along. I'm sorry.
But this is what Sweden does so well, which is obviously why they win so much. But you kind of want to leave room for somebody else.
They really master the code. And honestly, if they win again, great. Love Sweden. But my God, even in my 10 years of Eurovision, I've been to Malmo 2013, Stockholm 2016, and Malmo again last year. So Basically, in 10, 11 years, will I go to Sweden 4 times? I want to go to a different country, but nevertheless, well done to the Swedes/Finnish, because I think it's a good entry.
And they would have the record if they win this year. Correct?
They will, because at the moment they're tied with Ireland with 7 victories each. If Sweden wins this year, bye-bye Ireland.
Well, here's hoping it is Austria over Sweden, not that I'm biased or anything. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you for joining us and have a fabulous time at Eurovision on Saturday. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Hassan Anderson, our researcher was Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.